and thank you all so much for joining us. This is the Groundwater Roundtable, so hopefully you're in the right place. We are going to try and make this as conversational as we can. We've done this before in person and it's worked pretty well. We're doing a test to see how it works on Zoom. So just a few kind of rules for lay of the land. Like Guido said, please keep yourself muted. I also have the capacity to mute. So if you're munching on chips, I'm going to go ahead and mute you. If you have questions, by all means, please put them in the chat or you can raise your hand. There's options down at the bottom of your panel there, so you can raise hand if you've got questions for our panelists. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what Sigma means, some level setting, some definition of vocab. But first, I'd like to introduce our panelists or have them introduce themselves. We are joined by 4 experts in the field. So Carly, Jesse, Raina, and Brenton, I'm going to have you introduce yourselves. Let's start with Carly.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Carly Deitch. I'm a part of the UC Small Farms Network on their Sigma team. So my role is a Sigma TA and community educator across the Central Coast. So that includes Monterey, San Benito, Santa Clara, and Santa Cruz counties. We provide technical assistance and educational outreach for small scale growers. Small scale growers is a term that it does vary depending on the context. So we're funded by under the Department of Water Resources with their URCTA program. It's a long acronym, but they have their own criteria for small scale growers based on acreage and the California, Farm Equity Act. So, that our target outreach is for small scale growers who may be socially disadvantaged. And in terms of groundwater, we see a lot of vulnerability with well depth. A lot of the small scale growers, have more shallower wells. So we just try to conduct this outreach. Sometimes it's a little more preventative. But before I just carry on too long with that, I'll just stop there. Yeah, thank you, Catherine.
Thanks, Carly. Let's head over to Jesse and then Raina.
Hey folks, my name is Jesse Trace. I'm a small farmer with my family in Morro Bay. We grow avocados and citrus and flowers. And I'm also the groundwater engagement contractor for SLO County. I'm focusing on 2 high priority basins here. My colleague is focusing on another. And so Paso and SLO are my priority basins. And yeah, been learning a lot about how the basin has changed, especially Paso, how things have changed over time, and what's coming down the pike now for small farmers. As Carly mentioned, it's roughly under 200 irrigated acres, and yeah, funded through the DWR with CAF. So looking forward to talking about my region and answering everyone's questions.
Thanks, Jesse. Over to you, Raina.
Hi, everyone. My name is Raina Yagi. I'm a small scale vegetable farmer here in Sonoma County, and I'm also a CAF groundwater engagement contractor that is also hired through my GSA, my Groundwater Sustainability Agency, as another outreach arm for them. So I play this kind of interesting dual role, which I'll talk more about today, but the big effort, the big swing has just been trying to get more information and awareness about what's going on in each of our local regions, because it's all very different and we're all in different places. But we find our small farmers are facing very similar things, of course, which is why we're here. So yeah, I represent, again, Sonoma County. That's Santa Rosa, Sonoma Valley, Petaluma Valley basins are our medium to high priority basins. Popcorn to Brenton.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Brenton Kelly from Ventura County. Quail Springs Permaculture Farm is an educational nonprofit demonstration farm in the Badlands of the Cuyama Basin. We have the honor, distinction, and trouble of being one of the high priority overdrafted basins, one of the first to submit GSPs, and I serve on the standing advisory committee to that agency, and we've recently, well, not so recently, as soon as the plan got submitted and the plaintiffs didn't like it, we've been subjected to a comprehensive adjudication, which is working its way through the courts of Los Angeles Superior Court. So can bring a perspective of how Sigma and the legal adjudication, judicial process are explained as a parallel tracks, but seem to be more in a collision course. So we'll leave it at that for now. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Elle. So for those who are just joining us, just again, sort of level setting, we're going to start first 30 minutes of kind of roundtable discussion. I've got a series of questions to ask our four panelists. Then each of them are going to provide like a little bit of a case study for a deeper dive on groundwater in their region. And then we're just going to open it up to wider questions. But please, as we get started, don't hesitate. The more interactive, the better for this kind of dense and complicated topic. Feel free to write questions into the chat or use that raise hand feature. And otherwise, you can stay on mute, and we appreciate it, wrangling so many folks together. So a few things just to make sure we're all on the same page. What is SGMA? It is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. This is a set of laws that was passed back in 2014. So when we think about California's water, often people think about surface water, which has been pretty tightly regulated and controlled in the state since it became a state. So this is when we think about water rights, like first in time of use. But groundwater historically was unregulated. That meant if you owned a property, you could drill a well as long as you had permits from the county and pump out the water that you wanted. There were no restrictions around that. And then in 2014, the state realized we were really over pumping to a state of overdraft, pumping out more water than could be sustainably replenished. Groundwater is about 40 to 60% of our total water usage in California, so it's really important. And I want to note that I know that this topic can be really painful because we're talking about changing the water supply in our state. So it's difficult, it's confusing. This is this big local governance question. So how it actually works, the state decided to pursue local control. That means there are about 200 different groundwater sustainability agencies, or GSA for short. You're going to hear us mention that a lot, right? Raina mentioned, oh, I'm doing partial outreach with my GSA. That's the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, and that's who's tasked with making the plan, also known as the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, or the GSP, that goes to the state for approval. So we're going to talk a little bit more about what all this means. In terms of other vocab, so we've talked about SGMA, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. We've talked about your GSA, your Groundwater Sustainability Agency. A subbasin is the particular group, sort of aquifer that you are, that is the underground reservoir where water is held. So this local governance is trying to manage by subbasin, and our panelists can talk a little bit more about that. But if you've got more questions or if we're using vocab that's confusing, again, don't hesitate to put that into the chat and we'll do our best to answer it. The last thing I want to make sure everyone knows is that we are on a journey in SGMA. So the law was passed in 2014, and the idea is that by 2040, the state is meant to reach sustainability. Now, what is sustainability? It is avoiding a set of metrics that are significantly problematic. So things like groundwater levels going so low that more and more wells are going dry, particularly for drinking water. We're thinking about subsidence, where you've pumped out so much water that the land is actually shrinking. We're thinking about groundwater dependent ecosystems, right? We live in this legal fiction where groundwater and surface water are separate, but we know that they're actually flowing between each other all the time. So wanting to make sure that there aren't too many adverse impacts on those groundwater dependent ecosystems. So that's what we're all measuring for. Implementation, so actually the rubber hitting the road of changing how we manage groundwater started last year. So we're in the middle of a really big change. A lot of the most pain is really being felt in the southern San Joaquin Valley. That's not necessarily where our panelists are from today, but we've got others on the call who are experts on this. CAF and UCA and our small farms team are sharing outreach. So if you're in a region where you're like, I've got a lot of questions, I need a lot of help, please, please, please reach out to us. I'll put some emails in the chat so that we can make sure to help you with support for your particular area. But that's probably enough from me. Let's hear a little bit from our panelists. So why don't you start by telling us just what agriculture looks like in your region? What are people growing? And what is the water source? Are people mostly using surface water, groundwater, a mix? What does that look like? Let's start with Carly.
Yeah, so before I jump in, I forgot to mention which subbasins I cover. So, yeah, I covered some mid, high priority and critically overdrafted subbasins. So across my 4 counties, there's about 13 subbasins that fall under Sigma, and I focus on about 7 of those because the agriculture industry is the main extractor of groundwater in those areas. So that's why I have that focus. Um, so yeah, what does agriculture look like in the region? It varies greatly because there's so many microclimates in California. Even in the Central Coast, agriculture looks a lot different in Pajaro Valley than it does in San Benito. I just had a grower last week who was telling me how it gets, 100 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer, and she also just had snow last week. So there's these drastic climate differences where they don't experience that in Pajaro Valley. But overall, I would say I'll just kind of do a breakdown by a county. So Santa Clara, in terms of the growers that we work with a lot of Chinese growers in Santa Clara County. So we're seeing a lot of specialty Asian crops that maybe don't have a commodity board, bok choy, yam leaves, and so forth. And so for this small scale type of growing, we see a lot of greenhouse infrastructures with overhead sprinkling, broadcast seed, quick rotation of crops. And we also see different language barriers with our growers and accessing local resources. And we also see that in Santa Cruz County, San Benito, Monterey. There's predominantly Spanish-speaking growers that we work with who are small scale. Most of them are organic, diversified veggie farms with 40 plus varieties of crops on their farms. So we see a lot of strawberries in Pajaro Valley and Monterey, a lot of lettuce in the salad bowl in Salinas, artichokes, Castroville, but with the clientele we work with, it's a lot of diversified veggie farms with some strawberries sprinkled in there. Um, where does the water come from? The majority is groundwater. Salinas Valley is about 95%. Pajaro Valley in the 90s percentile of groundwater use. I think Santa Clara would be a little bit of the outlier. They're between like 40 and 50% groundwater, and they are part of the Central Valley projects, so they import a lot of water. And they also have this kind of distinction between North and South County. South County being more of the ag heavy area, and then San Jose being in the north. So a lot of urban management in terms of water use. Um, but yeah, that's kind of what's happening in my region, and I'll pass it back to Catherine or Jesse. Thank you.
Thanks, Carly. Yeah, over to you, Jesse.
Okay. Yeah, my two sub basins. One is critically overdrafted. It's high priority. That's the Paso Basin. That's at the headwaters of the Salinas River. So Paso Robles, San Miguel, um, and Templeton are kind of within the basin. And then the San Luis Obispo Valley Basin, which is a high priority but not critically overdrafted. So what's growing in these areas? Well, they're very different. One's on the other side of the coastal range, Paso, so much hotter during the summer and colder in the winter. It's an American viticultural area, so it's well known for wine grapes, and that's number one in Paso. Slow Valley also has a lot of wine grapes, but it's got a milder climate, so there's coastal influence, so you get more citrus and veggie row crops. And then in Paso, you'll also see kind of the hotter temperature orchards, so olives and pistachios. There's kind of some almonds that are left from a long time ago, but those aren't really irrigated anymore. And then there's some row crops, veggie row crops as well. And yeah, 93% of the water in the Paso Basin is groundwater. The lion's share in Slow Valley as well. That's where water comes from, the ground. We don't have really surface water resources down here. Yeah, I'll save some of these other questions for later. Pass it to my colleague.
All right. Hey, everyone, representing Sonoma County, just to get your geographic pivot. So We have probably around 3,500 farms, 600,000 working acres. Wine grapes, just like Jesse, is one of our leading commodities, with dairy, livestock, poultry being sort of a secondary large pillar of farming, followed even smaller by a lot of nursery fruit, vegetable, and specialty crops, of which we do have a lot of small farms in that, small farms in that arena. So, I'm sure this is redundant to say, but I think everyone here is facing increased pressure on land and development of rural lands and affordable housing issues that kind of come with a lot of this complexity as well. But that's something that comes up a lot, especially as, agritourism grows in good ways and in complicated ways here as well. But as I said before, we have three basins of the 14 that Sonoma County has that are actually designated medium to high priority, with Sonoma Valley being the high priority basin. So that's about, of that 600,000 acres I mentioned, 170K represents those three basins coverage, which is about 50% of Sonoma County. So we've got about 40,000 people that rely on groundwater within those basins as well. And Sonoma County is unique too, because it has the largest number of wells per capita. I think over 40,000 in California, plus the highest density of domestic wells in the state, which is an interesting fact because of a lot of folks, particularly on rural residential properties, are like, I'm not using a ton. Well, collectively, it's a good amount of our groundwater supplies. So, yeah, groundwater probably represents a little less than half of our total types of water uses. So while there's some mixing, groundwater, especially for ag, is our people's primary sources. So, yeah, that was Sonoma County's quick summary. I'm going to pass it to Brenton.
All right, thank you. Well, Cuyama Valley is high priority, critically overdrafted. We're 100% dependent on groundwater. There is no flowing surface water. There's no pipes, no stolen aquifers or rivers from other basins. It overlays 4 counties, so we have some jurisdictional challenges. We're about a little under 400 square miles from like 2,000 to 3,000 feet of elevation behind the coastal range. So we're a high desert. And very cold in the winter, very hot and dry in the summer. Our primary outputs are we grow, I think, 35% of North America's carrots. Those lovely little broken peeled carrots they call baby carrots, produced by Grimway and Bolthouse. They own 75% of America's carrot market, and half of their production comes out of the Cuyama Valley in the summertime. They're all down in Imperial Valley and Ridgecrest in the winter. And so that's the predominant groundwater use. It's overhead irrigated sprinklers. They can't seem to accommodate conservation methods or drip or anything. It has to be kind of complete saturation in order to get the carrots to grow. We do have some other perennials. There's a few pistachio growers, some grapes. The new grape, the kind of hedgerow grape, or I'm sorry, olive, is coming in, and grapes. So those all use about half as much water as the carrots, and there are other small farms. A few of the small farmers are dry farming grapes and olives, and we produce a bunch of garlic and quince and other fruits. The high fluctuation of temperature throughout the year is the biggest challenge for things. So we'll be freezing up at night and into mid-May. And then we'll rapidly get up to 105, 10 degrees into the daytime summer temperatures. But even the daytime summer temperatures will drop down to 45, 50 at night. So it's the hot crops such as tomatoes and peppers don't like that swing. So there's a real limitation. But that being said, it gives a big challenge to the pests and fungus and insects. So most of the valley is organic. Commercial, conventional, organic production, which is a little bit of the irony up here, but the critical thing here is that there is absolutely no other option besides groundwater pumping to 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 deal with, and so that's where the adjudication comes in to really impact the property owners. That's what it looks like in Kuyama.
Thanks, everyone. So just to define a few key points of vocab that have come up here, you've heard a few people say high or medium priority. This is a designation from the Department of Water Resources. So the State Department of Water Resources is who is charged with implementing how Sigma really functions. They have this map that I've put in the chart that you can see where are the high and medium priority basins. These are places that are really important. Groundwater either makes up a really significant portion of the total water, like you've heard from some folks here, or it is in a place that has been overdrafted quite a bit. There is an additional designation of critically overdrafted. That means not only are you high priority, you are so high priority because it is critically overdrafted. There has been so much water taken out that the state is needing to see significant changes as we move towards sustainability.
We
Brenton, do
qualify
you?
for both pumping more than twice the sustainable yield in our basin, so it's rapidly declining groundwater elevations.
Thank you. And do you also want to define adjudication for folks on the call?
Sure. A comprehensive groundwater adjudication is a judicial process where it's one of those, they try to explain it where there's not really a difference between who's on which side of the plaintiffs and the defendants. It's like everybody pretty much fighting for their property right, which is often based on their historical use. And the two largest carrot growers, two largest pumpers in the basin have sued everyone else, and we're all being dragged down to Los Angeles court to basically prove and defend our claim to any groundwater so that the pie, so to speak, which is obviously the pie is going to have to be reduced by 50%, and that pie is getting sliced up to allocate to each property owner some proportion. So it defines the groundwater, kind of commodifies the groundwater as a property right, where it was once, if you have property, you have overlying property rights and you can pump as much as your energy bill can sustain. At this point, that's come to a stop, and we're going to sort of allocate by adjudication each property owner's portion of that pie, and it kind of stops the growth and holds it at the status quo forevermore. If a new operator comes in, they have to essentially offset their water by purchasing water rights from somebody else.
Thanks, Brenton.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Anything else you wanted to add there?
No.
Okay, perfect.
It's expensive and time consuming.
Yeah, that's a good high level adjudication, expensive and time consuming. And if there's one thing that I want everyone on this call to walk away really understanding today, it's that Sigma and groundwater, all the work related to groundwater looks really different based on where you are in the state. But there's the particular sort of court case going on in Kuyama that is not happening all over the state. It's happening in some other places, but that is also happening alongside this public process of the groundwater sustainability agencies. So it's complicated, and the goal of this is not to be fear-mongering, but it is for people to be really informed on what's happening and what could happen in your subbasin.
Yeah, maybe one other thing is like the Sigma is very much written in support of local engagement and stakeholders engagement and property owners coming to meetings that are publicly, funded and publicly open to all. And the adjudication is you can't even show up without a lawyer. And it's in a distant county, and the public access and the public engagement is brought to a bare minimum. So that's probably the biggest differences there.
Yeah, that's an important difference to call out. And now we're going to get into a little bit more of like what does this look like? So just high level, what are your GSAs up to? What does Sigma look like in your particular region? Next, we're going to talk about measurements and how groundwater is actually measured. But first, just like what's your high level summary of how Sigma's functioning in your region? Carly, can we start with you?
Yeah, of course. So like Catherine and Britton have mentioned, Sigma looks different across the region. It can look different within the same county. It can even look different within the same subbasin if you have multiple GSAs managing that subbasin. But for my case, I'll kind of give an overview of some of them. So I have about seven subbasins I'm tracking. So it looks a little bit different in all of them. But I'll start with Pajaro Valley. They've been addressing, groundwater sustainability issues since the 80s. Their GSA was founded in 1984. So they're a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of developing and implementing the groundwater sustainability plan. They have required meeting, required well registration. They've already started, recharge programs. So they're a little bit ahead, and people, from what I can tell, people seem to be a little bit more kind of just used to the fees that they have in place. They have some of the most expensive groundwater. Well, the most expensive I have across my four counties is in Pajaro Valley. Um, so we're going to get into fees later, right, Catherine?
Sure, but do you want to tell people what
Okay.
that fee is?
Yeah, for sure. So in Pajaro Valley, they have a distribution water zone. So if you're, extracting outside of that zone, it's about $346 per acre foot. And acre foot is, oh gosh, roughly like 325,000, a little bit more, 800 something gallons of water. So it sounds like a lot, and it probably is a lot for domestic users, but for ag users, they're using lots of acre feet of water a year, even our small scale growers. Um, so it gets really expensive. Whereas in Salinas Valley, they charge nothing for groundwater. So you're not paying for your groundwater, you're just paying your electricity bill. They do have a fee to cover like admin costs, and that's per acre. So it does get a little confusing. There's a difference between being charged per acre or per acre foot. But one is being charged for your land and one is being charged for your groundwater use. So in San Benito, for example, we see both. People are charged roughly $6 per acre to go to GSA admin costs, and then like 14-ish dollars per acre foot. So we can see that big drastic difference. Just a few miles away in Pajaro Valley, they're paying $346 per acre foot, but San Benito, roughly 14. Santa Clara, they have groundwater benefit zones, so there are different ways that they charge people. But I think for groundwater, it's homogeneous across their four zones, about $43. So everything looks a little bit different in what people are paying for groundwater, if anything at all. And in terms of implementation of Sigma, it looks a lot different. Like I mentioned, Pajaro Valley is pretty ahead of the curve, where maybe Salinas Valley, their GSA formed after Sigma. So, they're still doing feasibility studies. They're still trying to gather data. They're just now implementing well registration. So a lot of their water budgets and, knowledge of what's happening, their sub-basin comes from modeling. So it just looks a lot different depending on where you're based. And I guess the last thing I will note on that is that within Salinas, the GSA monitors six subbasins. So right now, implementation looks pretty homogeneous across those, but in the future, we could see differences. The 18400 subbasins critically overdrafted, so there might be some differences with implementation Sigma rather than maybe the Upper Valley or Four Bay in the southern part of the county. So just look out for those nuances. It's pretty complex, but yeah, that's why we're also here for questions as well.
Thanks, Carly. All right, over to you, Jesse. What is Sigma looking like in your region?
So in SLO County, the Paso Robles groundwater basin and the SLO Valley basin are the two high priority basins. And all of the attention at this point is going to the Paso basin because it's considered critically overdrafted, and that's just a lot more water coming out that can be recharged every year. So the basin has a sustainable yield of how much it can produce before the volume starts to go down. The Paso Basin is at 14 thousand acre feet. I've seen it anywhere from 14 to 20,000 acre feet a year. And the Slow Valley is much less. It's a much smaller basin. It's like a 16th the size of the Paso Basin. Um, and so it has about 350 acre feet a year, but there's still dry wells in both areas. So there are serious issues from overdraft. Um, yeah, and how is groundwater measured? Should I bring that up, or do we want to wait till? Okay. Um, yeah, and in determining how water is pumped and measured, and I think it's happening in a lot of the state from speaking with other folks in different counties, but it's measured through evapotranspiration um, satellites, and they can essentially just look at a plot of land in the summer and determine how much water is evaporating off of it. So, whereas other basins have metering already on wells, in our case, this is all done via satellite. And yeah, so at the moment, the Paso Basin is taking all the attention. Slow Valley will, I suppose, come after once Paso is figured out. And there were just some recent changes that we can get into after this in terms of trying to get sustainability through fees. So I'll speak about that after.
Thanks, Jesse. Over to you, Raina.
Oh, great. So what does it look like in Sonoma County? It's been really heavy outreach. So I will say nothing has been mandated yet. That's kind of the big point to turn around. So a GSA, just for edification's sake, we have like a board of directors in each basin. We have an advisory committee in each basin that's made up of local agencies, cities, RCDs, even just community at large interests. We actually have about 3 of our farmers on each of those basins too, which is awesome to help guide this conversation and management strategies, as well as just a ton of consultants. I think everyone here on this call might agree that they have a ton of consultants that go into um, managing a GSA on all these efforts. And so since I began, like, I'm crazy enough to say almost like 2 years ago, year and a half ago, um, a large part of me coming on, besides CAF's own efforts to help small farmers with Sigma, was my GSA being like, we're in a big outreach time. We recognize we really need key messengers to go out into the community to be talking about what's happening, and that because the focus of Sigma is on local management, aka before things get too bad and the state has to take over, we really need the right people in the room to be promoting this message. So while regulations haven't come on, it's been a lot of monitoring wells being installed, a lot of monitoring programs in Sonoma County. Like we have one, a sort of voluntary level groundwater monitoring program where you can literally rent a well sounder, take it to your well, see where your level's at, and you submit that information. The GSA will plot that, show you a nice hydrograph of use over. It's a long-term project, but it's also an effort to get people familiar with knowing where their well level's at. But besides being a huge, it's been a big monitoring, but also data gap focus. We have such varied topography and even microclimates across Sonoma County that it's been really key to find where these, as they've designated, priority areas are. Like, where are these hyper-focused areas that we not only maybe need to put a monitoring well into, but we need to have heavier outreach into, kind of thing. And so, that you could probably monitor for years and years and justify needing to collect data, but at some point, and the GSA is also doing a lot more simultaneously, a lot of other projects around recharge. I know we'll get into that, but I'll name a few. Expanding recycled water use, stormwater capture, more research into the interconnected surface water, groundwater dependent ecosystems. It's going to be another acronym that flies through here, but they're recognizing the impact it can have surrounding ecosystems and people, and how we need to manage our groundwater for everyone. But I would say the strategy the GSAs have taken is very conservation based focus, because right now it's mainly there's like 6 main criteria of Sigma, right? Of things going poorly. So two of them that my basins are focused on is like there's been a reduction in storage, And we have some we've been focusing more on water quality as well. Like we've actually had some voluntary programs around um, people at no cost to them getting a water or seeing, if they're experiencing seawater intrusion and that kind of thing. But all that to say, there's sort of a combined suite of management projects happening across Sonoma County that is involving the public a lot more or doing specialized outreach to them. For instance, we have a water use efficiency pilot program that's called the Well Aware program. And so the GSA has done a demo site, installing some signage, doing some low grade practices to showcase water use efficiency, as well as doing on-site consultations. It's not been a ton because this is probably important to note that the GSA, in addition to doing fees, we do fees as well. Um, they applied for some state level DWR, Department of Water Resource grants that actually help supplement or do a ton of the weightlifting around these outreach efforts. So that isn't just the fees supporting a lot of this outreach. DWR they applied for, my GSA has applied for DWR state grants to help implement and do these strategies, which is huge. So we're kind of in the midst of those have been rolled out a little bit. We're seeing how those are going, how people are responding and trying to adjust the strategy as it goes, as well as considering other types of grants that may come in. But this was all to give you context, like that was the hope. We kept fees were kept low and supplemented by our county and city because of easing people into it. While also giving space and time for that outreach to happen and help people, whatever low-hanging fruit we could get through before we had to consider more mandatory measures. I'll end by saying my high priority basin, Sonoma Valley, is in a different place because they are high priority. And right now, looking at voluntary 15% reduction. Again, that's not per parcel. It's actually sort of this basin wide, and they're still delineating, okay, what area maybe we need to focus on having that 15% reduction in the first place. So the GSA has been focusing on large scale users first, saying, hey, what are some strategies you can do? Here's some other ways you can do it. And trying to see if we can't still reach below our minimum thresholds and goals. I'll end there.
All right. How does Sigma look here? Well, like I said, we have 4 overlying counties and only 3 small designated disadvantaged community town sites in the basin. No municipalities, it's all, county-wide areas. And so the counties have representation on the GSA. There is a community services district in the new Kuyama town site, so there's 1 rep from that. And that would have been the all of it at the forming of Sigma for agencies that have water regulatory powers, and that would leave out we have no water district, and there's no irrigation district, there's no unified pumper association until Sigma came along. Ironically, the plaintiffs in the adjudication formed a water district of property owners association, so to speak, 1 acre, 1 vote, got themselves on the board, elected themselves directors and chairman of the GSA, all 5 members of this small water district, which has no pumps, no reservoirs, no pipelines, no assets whatsoever. It's really just a shell of an association to sit on the GSA, and they have been the chairperson and directors of the GSA from the outset, in spite of the outcome of the GSP that they then took to court to sue because they didn't like the outcome. So with that organization, they represent 5 seats on an 11-member board of the GSA, and we are 5 years into our GSP, which was submitted in 2022. It got initially designated as incomplete, inadequate by DWR. It took a year and a half to get through that. They jury rigged it a little bit and got compliance, and we've just resubmitted, well, I should say in January of last year, resubmitted an update, and we've just received a DWR letter, and it's coming up for review in this upcoming meetings this week, and I haven't seen their the text itself, but apparently there's been some concerns. The GSP called for recognized in unsustainable practice in if 30% of our monitoring wells were below their thresholds for more than 2 years, and within 2 years of our GSP, we were exceeding that, and they rewrote the plan just in time before the 2 year criteria ran out, and they lowered all the minimum thresholds. So we adjusted the goalpost substantially. That got us into compliance. So we're no longer experiencing unsustainable production, and the groundwater continues to be depleted at about twice the sustainable yield. That's being that about a little over 20,000 acre feet is the recognized modeled sustainable yield that we have to achieve, and we're pumping at about 44,000 acre feet, and Grimway and Bolthouse themselves are pumping at about 29 to 30,000 acre feet themselves, and the rest of the basin makes up about half of the sustainable yield. So with 5 years into it, we've started the great term. Yeah, you talked about consultants. Consultants use all sorts of jargon. The increased diminishment, which is essentially the cutback. We're a couple years into it, but the way they cooked the books, we're still way above 50% overdraft, and we're 5 years into the 20-year plan. So Sigma seems to have been pretty thoroughly captured by the pumping industry. Seems to be the science behind it. We've got a model that measures everything, and say a very fancy consultant model. Woodward and Kern is the consultants that build the plan, and they are based up in Sacramento. They have no office in Cuyama or even Bakersfield. And although the larger pumpers above 20 acre feet are required now to have flow meters on their wells, so we are getting actual data, and the actual data doesn't seem to work and correlate well with the model. So, there's a problem there. The model, yeah. So there's some reconciliation there, and the desire to get to actual data as opposed to doing all the management on a modeled, synthesized data is kind of the upcoming challenge. At what point do we start using the minimal data points of actual pumping meters when the model is based on estimates of the last 40 years of pumping? So that's a big kind of challenge to the basin is how do we actually get to real data? There's a question: is the water level accounting gimmick that they used being legally challenged? No, it's legally defensible. The GSP says that the original data was flawed, and that we didn't know enough about the basin when we started out. So, they even claim that the original sustainable criterias, which are those minimum thresholds and desirable objectives, were all politically
That's
motivated.
bizarre. Yeah, it's
and so that the original plan was flawed, and that now with the lowered thresholds, we're more science-based. And even though one of the criteria that set the minimum thresholds was to essentially draw a plot line from the diminishing groundwater levels of wells, plotted out to 2040, and given that we should be doing diminished pumping in that interim, if you just plot it down there so that we won't exceed it, given no change, that would be a safe place to put it. The real challenging part of this is that sustainability is defined as no further undesirable results, and the undesirable result that is most measured in Cuyama is lowering of groundwater levels, which relates to the loss of storage. And so it's if those well elevations just level out, that would be sustainable. No reference back to the year that it was Sigma was passed or any historical restoration component. It's like we could drain it to the bottom of the basin, and as long as we didn't go any further, we could call that sustainable. You can tell I have a few issues with Sigma, and the outcome so far has not been super confidence building.
Thanks, Brenton. I appreciate the honesty and clarity about what's exactly happening.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure we define a few pieces of vocab that we just went through, just so everyone again is on the same page. So again, your GSP is that groundwater sustainability plan. So the idea is that all these local agencies are submitting these plans to the Department of Water Resources. That can be found to be like complete and satisfactory, and that's the plan you make. They can be incomplete, need more work, or they can be unsatisfactory, and then they go to the State Water Resources Control Board, where you could be put on probation, and the state actually then takes charge of what's happening with the plan there. So we can think more about the success and flaws within that overall process. But first, I want to hear from everyone what fees are being charged, right? If someone was going to go to probation, they would have a whole new set of fees. But before that, how is water being measured? Are there any allocations, and what fees are being charged in your subbasin? So let's start with Carly.
Yeah. So for the way that water is being measured, I'm forgetting the name of the acronym, but it's a lot of GSAs are using CIMIS, I'm forgetting Irrigation Information System. And it's kind of like a weather station. We have a couple set up across different counties, like in Pajaro Valley, there I believe are two or three, and then in Hollister we have some. Salinas is also using it for their integrative hydraulic models. And like Jesse previously talked about, it does a lot of ET, so evapotranspiration, so like evaporation from your soil or transpiration from your plants. And that is used a lot to account for water budget. So the inflows and outflows of water within the subbasin. We see in certain parts, I touched on this a little previously, but Pajaro Valley, we have required metering. That being said, though they are ahead of the curve with a lot of things, they still experience about 12,000 acre feet of overdraft a year. We see that in other areas like Salinas, there's no required metering, there's no required well registration. It's being implemented now, but there's no punitive measure for not partaking in it. So just that rate of implementation, like I mentioned, is a bit different. San Benito, there's not required metering, but you are charged for groundwater extraction. So the way they do that is by kilowatt hours times your discharge rate based on your pump size. Um, I, I will say that none of my subbasins have allocations. To my knowledge, there's about three different ways allocations can work based on, gross acreage of your subbasin, and that's kind of split evenly across groundwater beneficial users. You also have irrigated land, so that's more based on land use. So maybe you have more acre feet allocated to you based on your crops. And you might see that some in the Central Valley, and also like this pro rata reduction based on historical use. So if they say, hey, we want everyone has to reduce 20%. Let's say you use 10 acre feet of water a year, 20% reduction would be to 8 acre feet. Whereas if you use 100 acre feet of water, that 20% reduction would be 80 acre feet. So that's why the historic use, there's a little bit of contention there. But in terms of my region, we're not seeing allocations, we're not seeing water markets. And in terms of how water is being measured, a lot of it is modeling, a lot of it in certain areas that has required metering, like Pajaro Valley or Santa Clara, they have a little bit more of precise numbers on that. But yeah, we do see a lot of modeling going on in our area. And I think finally, just to note, like Catherine mentioned, there's these 6 sustainability indicators that we have in Sigma. And the three big ones in my region, I would say were groundwater levels, because we have three critically overdrafted subbasins. And as those groundwater levels decrease, we have a lot more seawater intrusion. So seawater intrusion is really big on the Central Coast, which also ties directly into groundwater quality. So you're going to see a lot of nitrates in any ag heavy areas, but we also have a lot of chloride from the seawater intrusion. So I think those are the three areas that we are focused on over here. But I won't touch on fees again. Everyone has different fees, and I touched on a little bit earlier. So I'll pass it over to Jesse.
So in SLO County, Paso Basin tried unsuccessfully to the GSA working group that's organized as a JPA, a Joint Powers Authority, tried unsuccessfully last year to implement groundwater extraction fees through a Prop 218. And that failed. It was rejected by the users over the basin, and it's more or less it's one parcel, one vote. Although I think it's weighted depending upon size or water use. But I think what people are starting to realize is that this is a very complex subject, and it tends to be further complexified by consultants and other players, seemingly at the advantage of sophisticated firms and big players that have the resources and the time and energy to take this on, this subject. So the Prop 218 failed last August, and now the Paso Basin has essentially gone around the back door, and they've approved a Prop 26. A Prop 26 can instate groundwater fees, and it cannot be rejected by the people. And so at this point, late March, they're going to determine exactly how groundwater extraction is going to be, the fees are going to be composed, whether that's volumetric or on a parcel basis. Last year, the Prop 218 focused on a volumetric extraction, and then there's differences between the Prop 218 and the Prop 26. And I just wanted to echo while I'm speaking what Brenton said, that there's also a pretty clear capture of the Sigma framework and levers by bigger players. We've seen a similar story happen here, where water districts were formed in order to have power in Sigma. Sigma is supposed to be locally controlled, and on paper that sounds great, but what happens in reality is that small players don't necessarily have the time, the means, the technical understanding to take this on. And so at this point, there are a lot of big players that are calling the shots. No advisory boards. It looks like there are going to be some from the outreach. It was suggested to increase the size of the board. That was rejected. So it all sounds good on paper, but what actually happens is, people don't really have a say in this. So we'll see what the fees look like next month. But last year it was something around $60 per acre foot. And I imagine it'll be something like that. And another thing to think about is how does that affect your operation, depending upon you being a billionaire landowner, and agricultural conglomerate or a small player. Is that really an answer to sustainability, or is it just a way to measure it and not really change anything?
Thanks, Jesse. I'll follow through with again Sonoma County. So, in terms of how groundwater is measured, it's very similar to how Carly said it. Initially, DWR specific land use and crop maps and parameters were used to reference like how much certain crops. So the categories are divided by like wine grapes, truck crops, and berries and whatever. Um, and then further refined, I'm sure folks in this call are used to Land IQ being a really big consultant part of the GSAs that have even created their own, or at least I'll speak to my base and their own Land IQ ET model that's coupling remote sensing image sources combined with their own and other like live field station data within the county itself. So as accurate as they can get it. Um, I will say this is the language of how the GSA puts it is the fees are less a reflection of the extraction of your use and more of the investment in the management of your water for the long term. And so while nothing is actually being hard measured like via meters yet, it's more of like how can we make sure we don't maybe have to get there and what sort of long-term practices project can be put into place that your GSA needs to work on in order to keep folks from getting to problematic levels. So with this Sonoma County GSA's a while back created, it's called Guide, and it was not working this morning, unfortunately, but I'm gonna put it in the chat. But this is actually where you can, because it's your parcel data is sourced from our county, and so they're able to showcase you your irrigated crops, your what exactly you're irrigating, your parcel size, et cetera, et cetera. It has no personal or private information on it. It's just so you can showcase, so you can actually see how did the GSA measure or estimate rather your groundwater usage, and you can actually contest this. So if this doesn't look accurate, and any number of reasons could be you fallowed land, you changed your crop type, that's not actually, that piece of land doesn't actually count for whatever reason, or you think you're being more efficient because you actually have a meter or some sort of monitoring device that has helped inform your water usage more specifically. So the GSA actually over the past couple of years have received a number of contestations, and I will say it's been heavier in the vineyard category, sort of alluding to Jesse's point of how like those who can manage it will and find their way in and offer their opinions, information, and data that they're often able to track a little bit better. But it's something that I keep trying to outreach to folks that this even exists and just to be a check and see like, does this sound right? And this follows with the sort of long-term goal of folks just like, I don't know how much I use. I'd really like to know, like, how can I get there? And so again, the GSA, besides having that well monitoring program, they offered free flow meters for, I want to say it was like 50 per basin. Which is, I think, about closing down now. They've offered them all away, which was, again, another outreach and incentive tactic for folks to get to know their water. Again, the deeper questions are who's taking advantage of that? Are those meters going to people that need it? Is it just really fervent residential homeowners that just really want to know? And that's not where we need to put our efforts. But in terms of fees, so they were adopted. Uh, let's see, I think they were updated in 2022, but they had like 2 years of public opinion on this, of folks coming in and weighing in on what's fair, what's equitable. The boards were concerned about charging fees prior to the development of their groundwater sustainability plan. On addition, as I mentioned before, they kind of wanted to ease people into like not so much the shock of the price tag, and so the county and some of the cities within Sonoma County agreed to offer supplementary funds for at least right now. Things change often, but through 2027, I want to say they've equalized the fee across the three basins, the fee being about $44 per acre foot per year. Now, if we broke that down, that's for Santa Rosa Plain, it's going to stay that way, but without supplementing cost, Petaluma Valley would go up to 315 per acre foot. Sonoma Valley would go up to 140. So there's been a lot of discussion and talk and opinions about the fairness of that, of equalizing the fee. Certain basins use more than others. How do we, right now each basin has its own advisory board of directors and consultants as well. There's been back and forth about why isn't there just one GSA? Each basin is so very different. And I don't think folks are actually pushing in that direction as much anymore and keeping it with sort of three representative GSAs. But to and yeah, a lot of what they've been able to do again to help support folks' attempts and transitions to some other types of sustainable water use efficiency practices has been, again, a lot of these voluntary programs to get folks signed up and just aware of their water use. So yeah, I'll pass it off to Brenton.
All right. Well, until Sigma came along, the price of water was whatever the energy bill was to pump it. We have, a lot on electricity, but a lot of pumps are run on diesel and are a little harder. The often the flow rate can be calibrated from your electric bill. But the challenge exists that we have a bunch of different types of wells in our valley. But when Sigma came along, of course, the water district was formed, also under 218, and they have a fee of land use fee. So for those who are your acreage charge is like $50 an acre for irrigated land and 50 cents an acre for unirrigated land on a parcel acreage fee, and the GSA has a volumetric fee that originally we got a number of DWR grants to help fund the research and development and pay all the consultants their fees. And so the water volumetric fee was about 5 acre feet for the first few years. It's, I think, now gone up to about 15. It's anticipated to reach 50 pretty soon, and may get above that, up into the hundreds by the time, if and when we reach sustainability. So there's that cost, and then of course now that the Grimway and Bolthouse are not satisfied with the GSP, we're now all having to pay our legal fees to partake in defending our water rights in the adjudication. And that is amounting to thousands of dollars a month for many of the property owners, quite debilitating to the small farmers who are trying to maintain their 2 acre feet or their 5 acre feet. And the Small Farmers and Ranchers Network that I represent, that is also supported by CAF, thank you kindly, is representing about 50 pro per non-represented pumpers who are trying to jump through the legal hurdles of filling out their discovery forms and verifications and answer forms in order to qualify to the plaintiffs as being legitimate and defending their water rights. So we're having sort of a 3-point bill coming with the water district, the GSA, and then the adjudication. I will say, with respect to allocations, the GSA has the plan, recognizes the central portion of the basin, which is the primary agricultural carrot growing region, as a central management area, and allocations are only, at this point, are only applied to those growers within that geographic area. That area is defined by the analytical model as being an area that has 2 or more feet of drawdown over estimated 50-year projection. And in the central part of the central management area, we're seeing 7 to 10 feet of annual drawdown in elevations. And the prime reason that the Grimway and Bolthouse have sued for the adjudication was that they believe that everybody in the basin will benefit from a sustainable basin, and that everybody in the basin should be part of the solution. And if the solution is we have to cut water back by 50%, then everybody should have an equitable or equal amount of cutback. Even folks who are, pumping 5 acre feet should be cut back to 2.5 when they're pumping, tens of thousands of acre feet with overhead sprinklers running down the ditch water. So it's a real challenge with applying equity to this. There's hope that in the adjudication we'll have a carve out for the small pumpers, and also hope that there will be a tiered approach to the cutbacks so that folks using 50 acre feet or less, or even 500 acre feet less, will not be subjected to the same amount of cutbacks as those that are pumping tens of thousands of acre feet. And there are two pumpers pumping tens of thousands of acre feet, and about 150 pumpers who are pumping under 500 acre feet. So, like, the equity issue is the big one, and that all will come out in the wash, so to speak, is apparently dependent on the judge, because the GSA is not interested in a tiered approach because, of course, they're being managed by Grimway and Bolthouse. So there we have it.
Thanks, Brenton. Yeah, I just want to note that I think that this equity piece is a really big question that the entire state is grappling with. Like, how do we do this in a fair and equitable way? CAF and UCANR are together working on a big report coming out in June. So if you're interested in this, drop us a line. I'll put some emails in the chat, sigma@caf.org, and we'd be happy to share some ideas, and are excited to be putting out this report with more ideas for the entire state, but there's certainly a lot more work. We end at 12:45, so we are all of a sudden short on time. I wish we could stay online all day talking about groundwater. We have had a few questions about recharge, specifically, how can someone build ways to store more water on their property, whether that's in the ground or otherwise, and are people talking about incentivizing, other ways of recharging? So if not everyone has to respond to that one, and if you're here in the audience with a burning question, now is your moment to put questions in the chat. Jesse, do you actually want to start us with this recharge piece, and then anyone else who wants to chime in can?
Sure. So recharge, yeah, essentially you've got supply and you've got demand, and recharge would be increasing supply, which is a no-brainer, but you don't really see it happening. In the GSAs, they don't talk about it much. It's all kind of large scale stuff. A little bit in SLO County. They want to increase in the Paso Basin the Lake Margarita, which is a dam, and that would store more water in the headwaters, and then they could release it and recharge it into the Salinas River. But that also means less water downstream. And recharging on a small scale is possible, and it's tricky with grading ordinances in every county. Every county is different. But there's really some great work in Harley's neck of the woods in the Pajaro Valley, because it's been a mature, essentially Sigma basin since the late 80s or early 90s. They've got everything metered, and they've also been developing these water conservation practices, and groundwater recharge has come in as one of the cheapest ways to increase supply. And there's a great article on that. It's called Recharge Net Metering, and essentially it's like net metering with a solar system, how you can put electricity back into the grid for the extra solar that you generate on your panels in your home. There's a lot of potential. There's another great link. It's called the SAGB, the State Agricultural Groundwater Banking Index, that shows areas where there's high infiltration because of sediments. So there are lots of opportunities to do this. I think small scale, all different scales can take advantage of their topography and their landscape to recharge water, and it does work. And there's a little bit in our GSA conversations about this, but really I think it's a big opportunity that's kind of being overlooked, as everyone is fighting on the demand side right now, how to carve out their demand. But eventually I think supply is coming, and there are ways to do it to really to increase supply. Yeah.
Thanks, Jesse. Go ahead, Brenton. Oh, you're muted.
I'll say off the bat that permaculture practices are a big advocate for berms and swales, and we've built a bunch at our own expense here on our farm. We've restored our wetlands from a wallowed ditch to a cattle wallow into a perennial stream. So the practices work and are highly beneficial, particularly small scale, broad acreage. Um, but as far as the basin's concerned, there is no reservoir on the river until you get down to Santa Maria, which has Twitchell Reservoir and is an adjudicated watershed. So they have actually the water rights to the outflow of the Cuyama River. And if the GSA were to intercept any of that water and put it out onto flood infiltration basins, we would have to buy state water and give it to Twitchell Reservoir in the Santa Maria Basin in order to offset the already adjudicated flows of the Cuyama River. And also the Cuyama River, when it flows very muddy and turbulent, so it would basically plug up with clay all of the infiltration basins. So as a centralized solution, it wouldn't work in Cuyama, but at a parcel by parcel property owner basin, it would work terrifically to recharge the basin at the property level. Although there's some question whether a 600-foot deep vadose zone, which is the unsaturated area that now exists in the main basin between the surface and the saturated water basin, how long it takes for any amount of recharge to make it through that dry, unsaturated basin could make it seem that there is no recharge. And then the funny thing is that in the overhead sprinklers of the carrots, they claim that so much water gets past the roots that by using more highly efficient irrigation systems, they would be reducing the recharge and so it's counterproductive for the carrot growers to embrace comprehensive conservation, but recharge in our basin is quite challenging. I'll pass it to Carly.
I know we're finishing up here. I guess I just wanted to bring light to a program. It actually is tricky to implement with small scale growers because a lot of them are tenant farmers, but there is the multi-land repurposing program. And we've seen that being implemented in Pajaro Valley alongside the Recharge Net Metering program. They also have a grant from the Department of Conservation to also they have a couple, they're in the implementation process in Pajaro Valley. So we've already seen 47 acres being restored back to wetland. The whole project is the idea that we need to turn 500,000 to 1 million acres to restore them or to fallow them in order to be sustainable. So we see that in Pajaro Valley. Also, if you're in Salinas Valley, they have a $10 million grant. They're still in the feasibility stage. So if you're a landowner, that is something maybe to look into to see if you're eligible for that, for a project, if that's something you're interested in. But yeah, that's kind of the last thing I'll say on that. Catherine, if you want to wrap it up.
Yeah, always so much more we could discuss. We didn't get to talk that much about what it means to be on an advisory committee, which we can walk you through, what some of the land fallowing, repurposing conversations look like, implications of groundwater markets. There's so much here. So really invite you to continue the conversation with all of us. We've got a bunch of emails in the chat, but thanks again for spending time with us today. Guido, over to you.
Whoops. Thank you, Catherine. Definitely a complex topic. So I hope the conversation can start with everyone involved in the future. Thank you again to you for putting this together, to all the panelists and our attendees. Final reminder, this meeting was recorded and we'll send you the YouTube link once it's uploaded. Thank you all.